All it takes is one small cut, one little scratch on the skin to end someone's life in a matter of days, no matter how healthy they were before. Amy Whitner being a perfect example. On March 13th, 2013, the 38-year-old had hours to live, and her doctors still had no clue what was killing her. She hadn't been able to eat anything for weeks without immediately vomiting it back up, slowly withering away to nothing but skin and bones. All the while, her abdomen had become so grotesquely swollen that it looked like she was 9 months pregnant. She had been in so much pain for so long that even morphine was no longer giving her any relief. And by early that morning, her family watched in horror as Amy closed her eyes for possibly the last time and slipped into a coma. Just weeks before she was knocking on death's door, she was at Disney World running the famous Disney Half Marathon through various Disney-themed parks. Amy, nearing the age of 40, was at the peak of her physical fitness, where many women her age might have begun suffering from joint pain or decreased stamina. Amy Whitner was at the top of her game, running marathons and exercising regularly. Only a week after running her Disney Half Marathon, Amy Whitner woke up in the middle of the night to excruciating pain pulsating from her lower abdomen. A pain which must have been off the charts, because even a formidable cardio athlete such as herself was finding it hard to breathe while going through it. She got out of bed and barely made it to the bathroom before crashing on the floor and calling out to her husband with the little strength she had left. Amy's husband rushed to her side and immediately took her to the hospital emergency room. The doctors ran some quick tests and called for a CT scan of her lower abdomen to assess her condition. The results, however, were a surprise for everyone. It turns out that a kink had formed inside Amy's intestines. Good question, Bean. A kink in the intestines is called a volvulus, which is a medical emergency that requires immediate surgery. It occurs when the intestines twist around themselves, or the tissue that supports them, which can block food and liquid from passing through. There was no way that Amy could bear the pain of her intestines folding in on themselves, and the only solution that the medical team could come up with at the time was to perform an emergency surgery. The situation was dire, but the procedure was fairly simple. Cut the part of her intestines where the kink had formed, and just stitch her back together.
What's simple about cutting up someone's insides?
Oh, hey, when did you get in here, Grill?
Since I heard you talking about Disneyland, I thought maybe you were talking about bringing us both like you promised.
Incorrect statement detected. My audio data records reveal 0 conversations that match this description.
You record our conversations?
I keep a documented record of many things, including the countless hours you spend playing games on your phone. If wasted potential were an energy source, you'd solve the global crisis. You should be using Testimol, a loyalty rewards app for mobile games. This video's sponsor allows you to acquire monetary resources for playing your favorite games, meaning you could generate something with this time other than regret.
Hey! Wait, you could get paid to play games? How does it work?
Even for you, whose cognitive abilities are rivaled by a potato clock, it is simple. Step 1, download Testimol. Step 2, confirm access so your phone may track your progress. Step 3, choose from a list of all the top games to play and download it. Note that coin rewards may depend on the game chosen. Simple as that, then Testimol tracks your progress, and once you have acquired enough coins, you may cash out via the rewards tab and choose from a variety of options, like PayPal, Amazon, and much more.
Wow, it is easy. Look at how many coins I got, and I just got started. Look, bro, they got Starbucks.
You can acquire even more coins with weekend and daily promotions. I use it daily, and have utilized it to procure my monitoring equipment. Oh, I mean coffee filters.
Be sure to click the link below so you can download Testimol or scan this QR code you see on the screen and start earning by playing your favorite games.
Okay, Howard, cool app, but quit deflecting. Did I make up Bruce's promise to take me to Disneyland? Yes. But did I ever consent to being recorded 24/7? No.
It is within smart home appliance standard protocol, unlike lying, which seems to be within yours.
It was worth a try. Whoa, hey, it's not gaslighting if it's for a good cause. Sorry, go on. Just pretend I'm not here.
So, after the abdominal surgery, Amy received the news from her doctor that it was a success. The couple had hoped that the painful nightmare was now over, and they'd be able to return home as soon as the post-op care was complete. After 10 days of rehabilitation, Amy's bowels became active again, and she was discharged from the hospital. The doctors assured her that all her systems were functioning and that she'd have a speedy recovery afterwards. But they were wrong. The speedy recovery she was promised never happened, and instead of her symptoms getting better, it seemed as if the surgery only worsened her abdominal pain. She tried to endure it, hoping each day that the next day she would wake up with less pain, but relief never came. Amy was fighting every day to do even the simplest tasks like eating. Each bite would be followed by chills and excruciating pain as her insides retaliated. She was frequently running a low-grade fever, and by the end of 6 weeks of excruciating pain, the once fit runner had lost about 22 pounds.
Did she not contact the doctors in all that time?
I thought you weren't here, but yes, Grill, she did actually. But whenever she shared her progressively deteriorating condition with the doctors, they simply brushed it off, saying that she needed more time to heal from the initial intestine surgery. But to Amy, who was going through it every second, she knew there was something more to the pain. I knew in my gut, literally and physically, that something was very wrong. But every time Amy went to the hospital, they would simply dismiss her concerns and send her back home with a strong prescription of antibiotics, along with the cursory excuse that she probably just contracted some sort of bacteria like colitis during the surgery. But eventually, Amy's final straw broke when no food or even water was staying in her stomach as she was constantly throwing up. She knew that if she didn't stand up for herself now, she may not be alive much longer. So she found herself back in the hospital emergency room. But this time, she wasn't going to let the hospital send her back with the same dismissive attitude again. This time, I knew I was not going home with antibiotics. The medical team tried to perform a CAT scan to understand more thoroughly what was happening inside Amy's abdomen, but she couldn't even ingest the barium required for the scan. They ultimately had to take an X-ray instead, which could still provide them with some insight. The results didn't come as expected. It simply showed a small bowel obstruction, which they deduced was likely due to her intestine surgery. Moreover, seeing how malnourished Amy was, the doctors on call had to immediately place her on NPO. Wellbeing. An NPO stands for the Latin term nil per os, which means nothing by mouth. To avoid complications, a patient in a state such as Amy's should refrain from consuming any food or drink by mouth. Since she couldn't ingest any medication, they inserted a PICC line, a long flexible tube, into a vein in her arm, typically near the elbow, and threaded it to a larger vein near her heart. Once she was all hooked up, they began providing her body with the needed nutrition and antibiotics while Amy's body hopefully resolved the small bowel obstruction on its own. But Amy's condition only worsened in the coming days, and just 3 days after she was admitted to the hospital, her belly began to swell rapidly. Her nausea could no longer be controlled with the medication she was given, and they had to insert an intubation tube through her nasal passage, down her esophagus, and into her stomach to manually reduce the pressure and bile building up there and keep her from throwing up. On March 12th, it was day 5, and there had been no improvement in her symptoms. Even the painkillers they were giving her, like morphine, had stopped working, making the pain a never-ending nightmare. Finally, a radiologist suggested further testing. There had to be something else going on inside Amy, as all these complications couldn't just be due to her slow recovery after the surgery.
Well, it's about time. What'd they find from the tests?
They never performed the tests.
What? Why?
The doctor in charge declined, and there was nothing anyone, not even the nurses, could do about it. The sole decision by the doctor pushed Amy to the brink of death. That same evening, Amy's vitals told an alarming story that the medical team had failed to recognize. Her heart rate, which would typically be within 60 to 100 beats per minute, went out of control, reaching 150 to 160 beats per minute. Meanwhile, her blood pressure plummeted. By 6 a.m. the next day, Amy's blood pressure kept dropping and reached a critical line of 63/51. It was no longer possible to care for her in her regular hospital room, and she was shifted to an intensive care unit where she slipped into a coma. Her family was devastated. No one knew when she'd wake up again, if at all. And potentially the saddest part was that all of this could have been avoided if the medical professionals in charge of her case had recognized the clear warning signs of what was actually going on.
What were they? She had so many symptoms.
Well, listen to the case of Michael Porter and see if you can spot the similarities. On Christmas Eve of 2015, just outside Lancashire, England, a 45-year-old genetics professor, Michael Porter, was standing outside his home, trying to fix his garden gate, when a seemingly insignificant moment changed his life forever. It was the holiday season, and Michael had some downtime, so he decided to take care of some overdue tasks. His garden gate hadn't been closing properly for a while, so Michelle grabbed his tools and started working on it. After about an hour of continuous work, he accidentally grazed his hand against a nail. It wasn't a serious wound, just a minor cut that bled a little. Michael, like most people, didn't think much of a small nick, as it's a common injury among people who handle tools. He came back inside the house, washed his hand, put on a band-aid where the cut was, and went back to work, not thinking much more about it. Little did Michael know that these typical safety measures were of little to no help in protecting him against what was now inside him. Just a short while after receiving what seemed to be but a scratch, Michael started feeling muscle pain, particularly in his armpits. He once again brushed it off, thinking that it must be due to the new deodorant he had used that morning. The horrifying reality was, his muscles were dying at a rapid rate from a condition called necrotizing myositis. And when muscles break down, they tend to become toxic for their surrounding tissues and can lead to critical internal damage if not dealt with in time. In the next few hours, he started shivering uncontrollably and even lost his ability to pass urine. There was something clearly wrong with him, and seeing his health progressively decline at an alarming speed, Michael's whole family rushed him to the hospital emergency room. By the time they arrived, his skin had become splotchy in appearance, and he was having significant trouble breathing. Despite being a genetics professor and advocating for the awareness of diseases that can lead to such symptoms, Michael's mind was in a complete haze. He couldn't pay attention to anything that was happening around him. And then, everything went black as Michael fell into a coma. And a similar thing happened to 12-year-old Rory Staunton from New York on March 28, 2012, when he was playing basketball during his school gym class. Rory dove for a ball, scraping his arm against the gym floor. The wound wasn't deep, just a small cut, barely even visible. Understandably, the gym trainer didn't even consider sending him to the nurse's office. He didn't clean it and simply called it a day by putting 2 band-aids on it. Rory didn't think much of it either, trusting the adult. But that trivial cut was about to rewrite his entire life story. A freckled redhead who always had his eyes towards the sky, Rory dreamed of being able to fly one day. Rory drowned himself in studying aviation books and global flight routes and enjoyed practicing on a flight simulator on his computer. At age 12, despite his parents telling him he couldn't take flying lessons until he was 16, he managed to find an aviation program called Long Island that taught 12-year-olds. He had a knack of finding a way around every problem. The ambitious boy's life wasn't just about flying. He was also passionate about justice and would always stand up to schoolyard bullies. Rory even wrote to the Swedish ambassador to North Korea, questioning why their army was well fed, but the people were starving. Rory was bright and roaring with life, but all that came crashing down in March 2012. On the evening of the 28th, Rory came back from the school gym. He ate dinner and carried on with his day as usual, until all of a sudden, a sharp pain started pulsing through his leg. Rory's parents thought it was probably due to his active day at school and thought he'd just sleep it off. But the trouble didn't end there. By the following morning, Rory's condition had worsened. His temperature spiked to 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and he seemed unusually drained despite just waking up. Seeing his health decline so quickly, his parents immediately called their pediatrician, Dr. Suzanne Levitsky, who agreed to see Rory around 6 p.m. the same day. When Rory arrived at the clinic, he displayed several concerning symptoms, like his skin that had become splotchy, increasing leg pain, and tenderness of his stomach. Rory's parents even showed the pediatrician the cut he got in the school gym, but she dismissed those things and concluded that Rory must have just caught the stomach virus that had been going around New York at the time. The doctor then asked the family to take Rory to the hospital for fluids and rehydration and explained that he experienced diarrhea as the virus ran its course, but he'd be good to go in a few days. Dr. Levitsky assured us there was nothing to worry about, said Rory Staunton, Rory's mother. But unfortunately, their doctor was dead wrong. Rory's condition only worsened with time, causing his parents to rush him to the emergency department of a major hospital in New York. But even there, the doctors seemed to be too preoccupied to assess Rory's condition in depth and simply diagnosed it as severe stomach sickness and dehydration. They administered 2 bags of intravenous fluids to fight his supposed stomach virus and drew 3 vials of blood for testing. Afterward, he was only given a prescription for an anti-nausea drug named Zofran and then sent home. The doctor who examined Rory in the emergency room even wrote PT improved on his chart before eventually discharging him. They assured the family that he'd recover from the stomach virus in a week's time, and they had nothing to worry about.
Hey, non-medico here? What does PT improved mean?
The PT stands for patient, so it means that they thought he had shown some level of progress or positive response to treatment. But the reality was entirely different. Thursday night, when they finally brought Rory home, he laid on the couch and fell into a deep sleep, exhausted from pain and the stress of moving around from one doctor to another. The next morning, on Friday, his sleep was rudely interrupted by severe pain in his leg again. It had become so intense that Rory couldn't tolerate it anymore. His parents were disturbed seeing their child in so much agony and repeatedly called his pediatrician. They explained how, along with the pain, his fever was also not getting under control even with Tylenol and Motrin. Night came, and it looked as if Rory was slowly slipping away. Such a grave condition could not be just because of a stomach virus. There had to be something else going on inside him. His parents rushed him to the hospital emergency yet again, and this time, they admitted him straight into the intensive care unit. Rory's parents needed answers as to what was happening, and why, just now, he was getting the critical care that he needed. Turns out, when the doctors in the hospital emergency room had examined him the day before, Rory was indeed battling for his life, and yet when his test results came back, he had already been sent back home with his parents. But everything could have been avoided had the hospital staff followed up on the family and reported how dire Rory's condition actually was. There was critical information kept away from the parents, leaving them in the dark about their son's own life. What's even more surprising is that the blood tests that came back were not even viewed by the same doctor who ordered them. But within just 1 hour of Rory's arrival at the hospital on Thursday night, his blood was flagged as showing abnormality and even had the obvious symptom of a high white blood count.
What does a bunch of white blood tell them?
Human blood is composed of 3 types of cells: the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets. The white blood cells are like the soldiers of the body's immune system, so a high number of them indicate that the body is fighting against an infection. Now, in the ICU, Rory was fighting for his life, lying unconscious on the hospital bed, vitals out of control. No one knew when he'd see the sky again, if at all. So, Grill, do you have any idea what could be happening to Amy, Michael, and Rory?
Well, the brainiacs in the audience might have figured it out, but I don't know.
That's understandable, Grill, especially considering a 2022 survey showed that even though 66% of US adults were aware of this hidden enemy's name, only 19% of them were actually able to identify it based on its most common symptoms. Now, try recalling all the cases again. Notice a common denominator?
Each of them got some sort of wound in the beginning, right? And then after that, well, everything went bad.
That's correct. In Amy's case, she had an invasive surgery where her insides were exposed to bacteria, whereas the other 2 cases had the person getting a seemingly innocuous small cut or scrape. You see, our bodies have an entire organ protecting them in the form of our skin, and any cut can open up an entryway for all kinds of bacteria and viruses to enter our bodies. But luckily, after the skin, there's another layer of defense against these pathogens, our body's own immune system. It fights valiantly against any invader that might enter the body. But sometimes, this system that's supposed to protect ends up becoming the enemy itself, leading to a condition called sepsis or septicemia. In medical terms, it's described as
dysregulation of hemostasis, leading to cytokine storms, endothelial dysfunction, and microvascular thrombosis.
Wow, Howard, those are some big words. You're a very smart coffee machine. It's too bad you're not helpful.
What Howard is trying to say is that sepsis is when your immune system overreacts to an infection, and instead of just fighting the infection, it starts attacking the good stuff too, damaging the body's tissue and eventually leading to organ failure. This condition actually progresses in 3 stages. Imagine the body sounding an alarm, a system-wide alert that something's wrong. That's how the first stage, systemic inflammatory response syndrome, begins. It's like your body preparing for battle, with signs like irregular body temperature, rapid heartbeats, and unusually high white blood cell counts. To confirm it, doctors would usually look for at least 2 of these warning signals alongside an infection. Notice how all the patients showed these initial warning signs, but instead of being given urgent care, they were told to return home with conventional antibiotics. When the first stage is not dealt with properly, things can escalate into severe sepsis, the second stage. This is when vital organs like the heart, brain, and kidneys also start to feel the heat. Symptoms like struggling to breathe, confusion, or reduced urine production are all red flags. Remember how Michael lost his ability to pass urine too? That's because at the time, his body was attacking his own kidneys. Doctors tend to keep a close eye on how the organs are functioning, often tracking urine output as a key marker to identify how fast the infection is progressing. Severe sepsis is really the body's organs crying out for help, and if the right treatment is not administered at this stage, then all bets are off in what is now a battle between life and death. When it develops into the final and most dangerous stage, termed as septic shock, it's like the body's power grid eventually failing. Even with medical help, blood pressure stays critically low, and organs don't get the oxygen they need. This is similar to Amy's condition, when her blood pressure dropped fatally low to 63/51 just before she slipped into a coma. With mortality rates as high as 70%, septic shock is a life-threatening emergency requiring immediate action. But even then, it may very well be too late. By the final stage, most physicians do realize what was actually affecting their patients this whole time, even if they could not diagnose from the first two stages. Still, the damage is already done, making the chances for the patient's survival extremely low. In fact, studies show that sepsis, in the absence of proper treatment, can potentially end its victim's life in less than 12 hours, and with an estimated 11 million deaths per year worldwide, it has now become one of the leading causes of death worldwide, right up there with cancer and cardiovascular disease. But sepsis doesn't just develop from bacteria entering the body through a cut or scrape. Take the case of Quan Brown from Australia, for example. On Sunday, August 13th, 2023, he came back home from a game of football with his friends and went to bed early. The next morning, Quan started feeling unwell. His body felt as if it was losing energy, and his stomach felt disturbed. Initially, his symptoms weren't severe, but his health took a steep dive a couple days later on Wednesday evening. He began throwing up uncontrollably and was burning up with a high fever. Diarrhea added to the weakness he had been feeling, and his condition no longer seemed treatable at home. His family brought him to the hospital's emergency department Thursday morning. The triage nurse examined Quan and informed the parents that he needed treatment immediately.
Triage? They different from regular nurses?
They are, to an extent. Triage is the process of sorting and prioritizing patients based on the severity of their condition to ensure that those who need immediate attention are treated first. Ironically, despite being categorized as urgent by the triage nurse, no doctor came to attend Quan for the next 3.5 hours. After waiting for so long, with Quan's condition rapidly deteriorating each minute, the doctor finally came and ordered a bunch of tests like reactive protein tests, a blood test, and a COVID test. This put the already tense family on another time gamble of 3 hours waiting for the test results. When the results finally came, the doctor simply informed them that Quan just had a virus and needed no further treatment. The hospital gave them the clear impression that they had nothing to worry about and that he'd be good to go with a few doses of Panadol and Nurofen. The only thing is, they were wrong. Quan's family kept waiting for his condition to improve in the coming days, clinging to the false hope the medical team had given them. His symptoms continued to worsen, and the hospital stood confident on its assessment that nothing else needed to be done. Something terrible was happening inside Quan, but before anyone could find out what, it was too late. This whole time, he had actually been fighting bacterial pneumonia and going through the early stages of sepsis. At that time, had the hospital administered the urgent care Quan needed, his story may have had a different ending. But sadly, on the 23rd of August 2023, 5 days after the hospital visit, Quan took his final breath. When an investigation was conducted against the hospital a few months after Quan's passing, some shocking factors came to the surface. Much of the critical information from the test results, which had the potential to save Quan's life, was not disclosed to his parents. Another unsettling revelation was that Quan was triaged as Category 2.
What puts someone in Category 2?
It means that the patient must receive treatment in less than 10 minutes as his condition is life-threatening. But despite that, Quan's family had to wait 3.5 hours for a doctor to show up. What's even more surprising is that Quan's symptoms, at the time, clearly put him under the diagnosis of sepsis. According to the New South Wales Health Adult Sepsis Pathway, certain symptoms like an elevated heart rate of 137 beats per minute and a high temperature of 39.2 degrees Celsius are considered yellow zones. And if these are accompanied by symptoms such as cough and breathlessness, the medical team is supposed to follow the sepsis treatment pathway immediately. Now, to be completely fair, the lone doctor who came to see Quan wasn't an experienced senior doctor, but a Status 1 Supervision International Medical graduate. But the thing is, they were supposed to be under the constant surveillance of a senior doctor during the patient's examinations. The family was helpless in this case, as they were never shown the results nor given any proper explanation about Quan's rapidly declining health. The thought that their precious son could have been saved all along is something the Brown family is still recovering from. They share their sorrow about how the most difficult sentence we have ever had to read has to have been, "The death of Quan Brown was avoidable," as it appeared in the medical examiner's report.
But then what happened to Amy and Michael and Rory? Did Did any of them survive?
Well, Amy Whitner, who fell into a coma after her blood pressure dropped critically low, was, as you may have guessed, going through septic shock at the time, and her body was swelling up from all the fluids and antibiotics that were being pumped into her system. Then, a point came where her organs began shutting down, and despite the medical team's continuous efforts, nothing seemed to help. Amy's husband was called at 4 a.m. to be informed that Amy was a lost cause, and when the last bag of fluid ran out, her heart would likely stop. But fate had other plans for the Disney runner. Her heart didn't give up. My Disney half marathon training is what prepared my heart for the real-life marathon I was to endure. Amy kept fighting against the deadly infection and woke up 24 days later on the 5th of April, 2013. The entire time, her family stayed by her side, holding her hand. When she finally woke up, her chances of survival increased, but then began a new challenge. She had to fight with all she had to get her old life back. After going through another 2 surgeries, a whole year on supplemental IV nutrition, and hours of physical therapy and counseling, Amy was able to achieve the life she has today. But unfortunately, not everyone fared as well as Amy. Michael Porter, who fell into a coma only 72 hours after receiving a tiny cut on his finger while fixing his garden, woke up after 3 months in a coma to a completely different reality. He dodged death, but at a cost. In order to save Michael's life when he fell into a coma, doctors had to amputate the arm which had received the small wound. His family made the decision to let go of his limb in the hope that it might save his life. When Michael woke up, he shared, "I became very quickly aware of my missing arm, even though I could still feel it, and can, in fact, still feel it." With the support of his family and several trained physiotherapists, Michael went through the recovery process to adapt to his new way of life. He particularly struggled with learning how to walk again, with having only one arm throwing him off balance and peripheral neuropathy making the sensations from his hand and feet confusing or absent. But the hardest of all challenges for Michael was psychological. For him, losing a limb was a devastating change to his self-image, and it took him some time to get used to his new appearance. He described his struggle as, "Being able to look at myself in a mirror, even with a shirt on, took a long time. It took even longer for me to be able to touch what was left of my arm." So far, Michael has adapted as well as he can to his second chance at life, and is now a strong advocate for educating people about sepsis. Both Amy and Michael, with great struggle and determination, managed to survive the final stages of sepsis. But Rory Staunton's story was different. Rory was admitted to the hospital ICU on Friday night and fought with everything he had against the deadly infection. But at that point, nothing could be done. His hospitals and his pediatrician's lack of coordination and neglect wasted the valuable window of time in which Rory's life could have been saved by proper treatment, and he eventually lost his battle for life on Sunday evening. Rory's mother, Orlaith, heartbreakingly shares, "A child who loses a parent becomes an orphan. If a man and wife lose each other, they become widow or widower. It's so unnatural. There isn't even a word for families who lose a child." But Rory's parents weren't ready to let their son's death be in vain. They soon founded the End Sepsis, the legacy of Rory Staunton organization, which has worked gallantly in his honor and has gained a respectable reputation in their efforts to bring about change in the way sepsis is identified and treated. They first began their efforts in New York, where they helped create Rory's regulations in 2013. These rules require all hospitals in the state to have clear protocols for spotting and treating sepsis quickly. Rory's regulations also include a Parent's Bill of Rights, which makes sure parents are given critical health information like test results and possible diagnoses as soon as possible, things Rory's parents were not told in time to save him. And the results have been incredible. Between 2015 and 2019, these regulations saved more than 16,000 lives in New York State. But the Stauntons didn't stop there. Their mission expanded nationwide, leading to a breakthrough in 2023 when the federal government took its first big step toward tackling sepsis. For their relentless efforts, Orlaith and Kieran were even honored in 2022 with the Presidential Distinguished Service Award by the President of Ireland. Cases like Amy, Michael, Quan, and Rory really shake your faith in the healthcare system to provide you with accurate and complete information. And a question that might come into people's minds is, are regular citizens supposed to be aware of everything before they even get to a hospital to avoid an avoidable tragedy? In all these cases, one thing was evident. The hospital medical staff and pediatricians were not able to recognize sepsis in its initial stages despite there being clear signs. This also shows the need for proper sepsis prevention training in all sectors, not just the medical staff, but the general public as well. And keeping to that need for awareness of one of the most deadly conditions in the world, here are some basic preventative measures that could potentially save you or your loved ones' lives. It's better to be safe than sorry, so treat any cuts or wounds by cleaning it with an antiseptic, like rubbing alcohol, and then keeping it covered until it's fully healed. And most importantly, keep an eye out for the common signs like clammy or sweaty skin, confusion, extreme discomfort, fever or chills, a racing heartbeat, or shortness of breath, and consult your doctor immediately if your condition doesn't improve. After all, acting early can mean the difference between a timely treatment and tragedy.
But what if the doctors don't diagnose it properly? Like in all these cases you just talked about.
I'm glad you asked that, Grill. Rory's parents have shared a pretty decent protocol that everyone can follow in order to hopefully avoid getting misdiagnosed or prematurely dismissed by the hospital staff. This involves informing the hospital of the doctor you regularly visit and making sure this information is added to your medical records. Next, make sure that every test that could reasonably be expected to yield critical information are conducted and that the results go through a trained professional who has a clear understanding of your symptoms. And before a hospital decides to discharge you, ensure that every critical test result was clearly explained to you and that no important information was kept hidden. Also, ask the hospital to provide a written discharge plan that has been discussed in detail by a decision maker in your care. Lastly, ask for a contact number before you leave, a lifeline in case complications arise or you have questions. Be sure to hit subscribe and the thumbs up. It's the best thing you can do to help us keep making more videos, like this one about the creatures that crawl into people's ears while they sleep and how to stop it from happening to you.